Dr. Ben Carson joins us tonight live from his home somewhere in the United States. Dr. Carson, welcome back to the broadcast.
Thank you. Always good to be with you.
That's good to hear. Dr. Carson, tomorrow, everyone says it's the most important presidential debate in recent history. That's what everyone says. Everyone wants to talk about what to expect, what Trump is going to show up. Can he be on his best behavior? Can he be civil? Can he be respectful? And can he just focus on the policies? What is it going to take tomorrow night for your brother Donald Trump to behave and to be presidential?
Well, I suspect that he will behave. He recognizes that their goal is to get under his skin. He knows that. But I think the reason that the debate's going to be so watched is because this is the first time we've had a presidential debate in which one of the candidates has been very non-transparent. And people want to know, who is this person? And what do they actually think? Are they a leftist? Have they moderated? Are they in the middle now? Have they moved over to the right? Are they conservative now? Who is this person? So I think that's what's going to garner most of the attention.
And how has the former president prepared for tomorrow night?
Well, remember, he's preparing every day because he's out there doing interviews and taking hard questions. He doesn't just look for friendly environments either. So I suspect that he'll be quite prepared for anything that they may ask him. And this is his 7th debate. So he's experienced with this kind of thing.
You alluded to transparency. Who do you think Vice President Kamala Harris really is? And let me tell you why I asked that question out of the greatest respect for her and being sincere. I was watching Meet the Press on Sunday, and when Senator Bernie Sanders, who is a proud progressive, asked about his friend, Vice President Kamala Harris, he said, well, she's not really she's really still against the fracking, but you know, she has to say that she's for fracking and all these other policies because this is what she has to say in order to win. I was just so stunned that he was so brutally honest and candid. And then it goes back to your point, who is the real vice president of the United States?
Well, you know, it's very interesting if you study the situation, because she's backed away from many of those leftist policies, but you notice the left is not angry with her. And you would think they would be angry with her if she was backing away from her policies. But that's what she meant when she said her values haven't changed. That was the dog whistle to them. Don't worry. I'm saying what I need to say in order to get elected, but you know who I am, so you don't need to be concerned.
Dr. Carson, what are the American people looking for that can satisfy them with the open borders, terrorists continuing to come in our country, innocent Americans being killed and violated as a result of illegals, law enforcement, police officers being assaulted and disrespected? What should we expect from Donald Trump if he's elected again? And what do you think the American people can expect if the former border czar is elected as president of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris?
Well, I think the only reason that Kamala Harris has traction with her record of failure at the border and being a part of the economic disaster that's going on, that's hitting everybody in their pocketbook, the fact that she's a historic candidate, potentially the first woman of color, and if she's elected president, the first woman, period. And there are a lot of people who will vote for her just on that basis. Forget about what it means to them and to their children, to their grandchildren, and to the country as a whole. They just want to be a part of something that's historic. That's a sad commentary, quite frankly, on our country. But unfortunately, we are there. We're at a point where we find, things like people who are big stars singing, or football stars or basketball stars, mean a lot more to us than our neighbor or even than our family member. And that's a sad commentary. It's something that obviously we as a country need to begin to work on.
How concerned are you about America's foreign policies with the eruptions continues in Ukraine and Russia, Israel and Gaza and Hamas? The Chinese continue to rattle their saber tooth. It just seems like there are all these eruptions on as it regards to foreign policy. What do you think that the Biden-Walz administration would have to offer in terms of where we are in our foreign policy?
Well, I suspect we'd have similar policies that we have going on now. It's not just the very sad circumstances surrounding the withdrawal from Afghanistan, resulting in not only the 13 American service people, but many others who died needlessly. That's a harbinger of things to come. Not showing a strong hand in the Middle East is the kind of thing that encourages Hamas. The fact that our policies toward Iran changed so that we dropped a lot of the sanctions and allowed them to accumulate enormous amounts of money. They were in the poorhouse when Trump was there, so they couldn't finance a lot of things. Now they can finance all kinds of things. And it seems like the Biden-Walz ticket probably doesn't understand the correlation between giving Iran a lot of money and increased terrorist activity that's going on, but also recognize that it's facilitating the development of a nuclear weapon by Iran. And Iran hates Israel and they hate the United States. And when they get a nuclear weapon, they're going to use it. They're not going to be deterred by mutual destruction, which has been very effective in deterring nuclear powers up until now. Because for them, if they get destroyed in the cause, they go to heaven and have 72 virgins. So no problem. This is a very different world we're dealing with. And we need people who are sophisticated enough to understand that. We need people who need to understand that we need to increase our oil and gas production and our exporting of natural gas. We need to be the world supplier of that. That will bring us an enormous amount of money, but it will also greatly decrease the coffers of Vladimir Putin. I don't think they understand the correlation. When we don't supply the world with all the energy that it needs, and we've got plenty of it, we make his energy much more valuable. That funds his ability to fight Ukraine almost indefinitely. So if they could understand that, I think they would act in a very different way, but I don't think they actually understand it.
What about here on American soil, where people continue to face high crime, robbery, no consequences for juvenile criminal behavior? People don't feel their neighborhoods are safe. It seems like there's an invasion of migrants. You look in a place like Colorado, Venezuelan gangs are taking over, boarding up apartment buildings. It's as if politicians and elected officials are appealing and appeasing the least common denominator of our country. It seems as though that it's all of a sudden is that the minority rules now, not the overwhelming virtues and values of Americans.
Well, you couple that with the fact that we have open borders, so that Venezuela and many other places are sending some of their bad elements into our society. And they're involved in a lot of the criminal activity that's going on. Our criminal activity is increasing. their criminal activity is decreasing. And they're saying, wow, we have 57% less crime. That's because they're sending all their people who are criminals over here. And it's making Americans feel less safe. Almost no one is going to go downtown in Washington or New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, without saying, is this safe? Do I need to take any special precautions? It's very good for the valet parkers because a lot more people want to use that now because they don't want to walk a block or two in the open and possibly be exposed to death. So this is a very severe problem. And it seems to be orchestrated because we have all of these DAs, Harris was one of them at one point, who are allowing this criminal activity, allowing people to go into stores and steal up to $900 worth of stuff with virtually no serious consequences for doing that. Not deporting foreign drug dealers who are killing our people, giving, no cash bails. All these kinds of things are creating this situation. And why would anybody want to do that? I suspect, I don't know for sure, but I suspect it has to do with the people who want to fundamentally change America. And we have to understand that, the leftists are not necessarily bad people. They just have a very different impression of what America should be. And in order to change it to what they need it to be, they have to create a lot of dissatisfaction with the current system. And this is one way to do it.
I'm Armstrong Williams. Dr. Ben Carson is our guest. Coming up later, Rob Bluey from the Daily Signal, and Josh Shin will be joining us. Don't go away. We'll be back. Dr. Carson, why does former President Donald Trump, because many people believe that Vice President Kamala Harris cannot win the election, but certainly the former president can lose it. Why resort to referring to the vice president as dumb, lowbrow intelligence? She's a beautiful woman. Do you think, and listen, we're not talking about somebody who is not mature and who has not been president before, but these kinds of things, character, civility, respect, deference, means a lot to some Americans. And it could be the difference between victory and defeat in some of these battleground states. Will we ever see him actually? And I know some people say, well, they're not voting for his character and his personality and his pronouncements, but still some people who say they will never vote for Donald Trump because of things that has nothing to do with policy. They would take Kamala Harris any day. How do you wrap yourself around that, and how should voters view this?
Well, it would be preferable, obviously, if he didn't do that, but that's who he is. But, it's sort of like if you were a patient and you had a very serious disease which could be cured by a very skilled surgeon. Would you rather have the surgeon who has a terrible bedside manner but saves virtually everybody, or the surgeon who has beautiful words, just everybody loves his personality, but he kills all the patients? Which one would you rather have? That's a very similar kind of situation. I think, we can continue to pray for everybody because we all have our defects. And hopefully we can move toward a society where people recognize that they're not each other's enemies, and that we'll be much stronger if we all work together.
What key issues do you expect will define the debate between Trump and Harris, Dr. Carson?
Well, obviously, the economy is going to be a big issue. You know, such important things as the American dream are faltering because all these young people coming out of college and graduate school, as well as people who are working in businesses, skilled professions, are having a very difficult time buying a home. And that's a big part of the American dream. It is the number one mechanism for wealth accumulation. And the average homeowner has a net worth $200,000. The average renter, $5,000. That's a 40-fold difference. And people are finding that dream much more difficult. And then it's a matter when you go to the grocery store. You know, sometimes it looks like you got to take out a loan to buy groceries. And everything is affected. Even car insurance. Car insurance is up 54%. That affects everybody who has a car. That's 90% of Americans. That's a real problem. And I think that there's going to be a lot of discussion about that. Whose ideals are the best ideals? Who can articulate the ideals in a way that it's understandable for people? I suspect that Donald Trump will push Kamala Harris on some of the things that she said, like taxing unrealized income, which would be a death knell to the stock market and to the whole capitalist society. You know, those kinds of things need to be aired out and talked about. And, you know, fracking and the effect of not developing our natural resources to the benefit of the people. Why is that not going on? And then I think Donald Trump will talk about some of his ideas, like decreasing the tax rate on businesses that manufacture all their product in the United States, bringing back to our shores many manufacturers. That's what we need, because that means many jobs. And Donald Trump's idea is to grow the pie. Kamala Harris's idea is to keep cutting pieces of the pie off and taking more and more of it. One system works very well, one doesn't. And I think the people will be smart enough to figure out what's going on.
You know, there's this constant conversation about this country being center-right, but that has to be a myth, because this country has become so center-left, particularly with the Democratic Party. Even they had at the Democratic conventions where you could literally go and get a vasectomy. I mean, they had shops set up at the convention. They don't even want to make abortions rare anymore. And you talk about puberty blockers, and you talk about this gender affirming. I mean, it is as center as left as it has ever been. How do you see the American people embracing not just a center-left country, but the fact that Vice President Harris make no apologies about the fact that she's progressive, and people think that she's even further to the left than President Joe Biden?
Well, I suspect that the country is not as left as it seems. But when you have a media that is constantly fanning the flames of Marxism and socialism, it certainly seems as though we're moving in that direction. And then, you know, there are issues like abortion. You know, that's not particularly left or right issue. That's an issue of a lot of women feeling trapped and not having any options. And there needs to be a lot more concentration on making adoption affordable and much less of a hassle, and other kind of support systems so that they don't feel that way. And who knows, it might even be worthwhile to start talking about abstinence once again. That's a guaranteed way of making sure you don't get pregnant. How about waiting till you get married? All the think tanks, both liberal and conservative, demonstrate that children who are raised in a traditional nuclear family do much better on virtually all parameters. And, we should embrace some of the principles that made us into a great country and not just go headlong down a pathway that never seems to yield much fruit.
It sounds like you're talking about the issue of morality now and the 10 Commandments: thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. And what about when it comes to morality of both the candidates, Mr. Trump and Ms. Harris? How do they match up in terms of their own character and their own morality and their own faith, Dr. Carson?
Well, I would never set myself as the judge and jury. That's going to be the job of God. He tells us to love our neighbor and to love them as you would love yourself and to love God. And that's what we need to do. And we need to recognize that there are none of us that are perfect. That's why we need a Savior. And that there are some general principles that facilitate civility. If you love your neighbor, you're not going to steal from them. You're certainly not going to kill them. You're not going to be bearing false witness to them. You're not going to be envying. Think about all those things. You're certainly not going to be killing them. So those are things that were bedrock principles in our country for a long time. And now people want to say everyone is their own judge and determinant of what is moral.
Dr. Carson, what is at stake on November 5th? And why do you feel, if Donald Trump is the clear choice for the American people, his being a former president, why is it such a close, razor-thin race? Why?
Well, it's not really about Democrats and Republicans. It's about people who believe in the founding principles of our nation and people who think that we are on the wrong track and that we need a fundamental change in who we are. And this is not something new. This has been going on for a long time. There have always been people who wanted to change us into something else. And, the congressional record, January 10, 1963, the 45 goals of communism in this country goes right down the list. So many things that we see happening. And when you look at what's happened to Venezuela, which was once an incredibly prosperous country, #1 country in South America. And I'd been there a number of times, beautiful place, beautiful hotels and resorts, museums. And the thing they argued about is whether or not they were the most beautiful people in the world. That was the big issue. We got the most Miss Universes and stuff like that. And now look at it. Once socialism took hold, it went from #1 to the bottom of the heap in terms of economics. And people think that can't happen in the United States. It's already in the process of happening. The question is, can we stop it? So that's what's at stake. Are we going to continue to be that shiny city on the hill, which is a splendid example of what can happen when you have a country that is run on the will of the people with decency and honesty and our good Judeo-Christian values? Or do we want to go the other route? That's what this election is about. And socialism has never worked for anybody, but we always have these situations where someone says, well, I know it didn't work before, but this time it's going to work. And they're being fooled. It never works.
Well, Dr. Carson, it's certainly always an honor to have you on. Just much respect. Americans across the board have a lot of honor and respect for you, particularly for your moral striving, your civility, your calmness, and also they remember your remarkable days as the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University, and we just appreciate you as being a true American hero, a true patriot, and thank you for what you do, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Your Voice in Your Future. And you also have a book that's out, Perilous Times. It's in Amazon and in bookstores all across the world, correct?
A Perilous Fight, that's correct.
Perilous Fight, it's all the same. Perilous Times, Perilous Fight. But thank you, I encourage people to go out and get your book, Perilous Fight. And Dr. Carson, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
When we come back, Rob Bluey from the Daily Signal and Joshua Shin from Young Voices will join us to talk further about this presidential race and tomorrow night's presidential debate.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back to the broadcast. Duvalier Malone is an ANC commissioner-elect and a political columnist. He's joining us via Zoom. Of course, Rob Bluey here is in the house from the Daily Signal. And Joshua Shin from Young Voices is also in the house. Let me start with you, Duvalier. What do you think are the key policy issues that are shaping voter sentiment this election cycle?
Absolutely. I think the key issue is the economy, and particularly inflation. When we look at everyday people, they're looking at the cost of groceries in the grocery store, which is becoming more and more expensive for many families across the country. And finally, I think women rights. When we look at what's happening with reproductive rights, Roe versus Wade, a lot of women are concerned being that they can't get abortions in certain places across the country. So I think the economy, and I honestly think women's rights are going to be the top issues that really drive this election.
Joshua, how has the economy influenced the platforms of the leading candidates?
It's made it really tough for everyone involved, right? But especially Kamala Harris. She's had a lot of trouble distancing herself from the policies of the Biden administration. The most recent New York Times Siena poll showed that despite all the work, despite Trump having been around for and active longer than Kamala Harris, that they still see Trump as the outside candidate. Even so, because she has so much trouble extricating herself from those policies, I think that economics is definitely more of a problem for them than it is for Trump, which the economy was great under him.
You know, here's what's strange with both conventions. Trump nor Vice President Harris got the bump from the convention that was expected. And with all the media, and they're fawning over her, it's her honeymoon, they're celebrating her, but the fact that she has not really taken any policy position, she did the interview with CNN, but her strategy is not really to do interviews because she believes that Trump's foot and mouth disease will give her the clear victory to the White House. But why is it such, and I asked this of Dr. Carson, why is it such a dead, heated race? And all of a sudden, the New York Times today says Trump is leading.
Yes, and Armstrong, the thing that's striking about it is if you look at some of the policy issues that we just were talking about, economy, immigration, crime, those three in particular, which always are the top three issues when you ask voters, Trump holds the lead over Harris. So I'm convinced that there's a certain population where Trump will just hit a ceiling. They, for whatever reason, have made up their minds, dating back to 2016, that they are not going to support Donald Trump. And so he knows that there's going to be that ceiling. Now, if it comes down to 6 or 7 swing states, all he has to do is appeal to certain segments of the population in those states where he's able to maybe pick off enough Democrats to make this a race that he's able to win. And specifically, I'm talking about in Pennsylvania, the blue-collar workers, the people who traditionally would support Democrats. Ronald Reagan obviously had success winning over those types of voters. In Georgia, black men, you know, they've shown that there's more willingness to embrace Trump and some of the policies because they've been suffering economically. So I think if Trump's able to do that, perhaps you have a situation where he's able to win this thing.
Duvalier, with all the things that people know about Trump, they feel he's disrespectful, he's rude, he's crass, he name calls, he's not presidential, they believe he will lie. But with all that, of all the things, and everyone knows exactly what he is, he's not a hypocrite, he can't help but show himself no matter where he is. Why is it that the vice president is not soaring in the polls above and running away with this presidential race?
I think a lot of times, you know, the media really pumped up this election in regards to, you know, when we look at the battleground states, Armstrong. So this election is exactly where it was going to be. Whether, you know, Kamala Harris getting into the race, yes, it motivated a base. But I think when we talk about those swing states like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, like Georgia in particularly, so many people in this country feel as though they have been forgotten. And so I admire the vice president for going to Savannah, starting to talking to those rural voters in those rural communities, because so many of them have felt like they have been forgotten. And so I think it comes back to the point of making sure we're speaking to those issues, you know, inflation, making sure we're speaking to the issues of, you know, everyday Americans who are not watching mainstream media, but they are worried about whether or not they're going to have food on the table, whether or not they're going to have enough gas to get to the plant that they're working in. And so I think that is one of the reasons why they have struggled so, because they haven't been speaking to those everyday people. So we're starting to see some of that messaging, talking about the economy, speaking to, you know, small business and entrepreneurs, which we know a lot of small businesses closed after COVID-19. So they're starting to speak to those issues and getting into places where it really matter. And I think we're starting to see it tighten as they continue that message on the ground in those battleground states.
And another reason that Harris isn't doing as well as Trump right now is that Trump and J.D. Vance are doing the work, right? They're going out to speak to media, right? J.D. Vance especially has gotten pretty good at confrontational interviews. But what's key is that Trump is on a lot of podcasts now, right? So everyone who thought he was a monster gets to listen and see for themselves, right? And these podcasts, these YouTube shows are where these undecided voters are, right? Like, if you don't see either political party as yours, you're not watching network news, you're listening to these podcasts. And that's where Trump is maybe not making his case, but he's coming across as more of a presence and not the monster that he's been painted to be.
You know, this is the first time in my young political life that I forget that Joe Biden is president. I absolutely forget that he's still in the White House. Every now and then you see him out. I'm just curious, is he helping the vice president's ticket, or he's continuing to decline and we just don't get to see him? Because I'm telling you, he's rarely seen or heard from.
You're absolutely correct on that, but maybe that's why his approval numbers have gone up since he's bowed out of the presidential race. The American people have largely forgotten about him, but I don't think that they will forget about the policies. And we've talked about how important the economy is in the minds of so many voters, and just affording gas, groceries, and rent, as Dr. Carson was talking about, is a hurdle for many Americans. And so if you compare the policies of Donald Trump and what happened in his administration versus the last 3.5 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I do think that there's a stark contrast. And that's ultimately what I think this election will come down to. People will see that contrast. They'll see it on immigration. They'll see it on crime. And that's how they'll make their decisions. Yes, there's a certain segment of the American people who will vote on personality and maybe how Donald Trump treats Kamala Harris in the debate tomorrow night. But I think at the end of the day, they see that their personal finances and their personal situation isn't better today than it was under Trump. And that's what they're going to make their decision on.
Duvalier, what is it that the vice president needs to say, need to do to pivot to show our own identity away from Biden's policies over the last 4 years that she's not doing, that could be a game changer for her in the next 2 months that is left in this race?
I think she's already starting to do that, Strong. When we see her in Savannah, talking to everyday people, going to places that normally they will say, hey, you shouldn't go to, right? So I'm starting to see her do that, to pivot to say, I am going to be a president for all people. I'm going to be a president not just for, Democrats or Republicans, but I am concerned about those kitchen table issues. I'm concerned about gas prices. I'm concerned about inflation. I'm concerned about your reproductive right. I am concerned about these issues that are affecting everyday people, and really bring it and speak to the people who have been forgotten. I honestly believe, as I traveled across this country talking to people in rural America, they are a lot of times the Democratic Party has been out of touch. And I'm so excited to see her pivoting to going into those small businesses that are struggling, those small businesses that are in those rural communities that have been the pillar of those communities, speaking to that. And I also want to say, we failed to talk about, we asked the question about where is Joe Biden has been, but when we talk about Donald Trump in these appearances, no one is talking about his mental decline. No one is talking about how he rambles for minutes on top of minutes at these press conferences. Are these press conferences really effective? In my opinion, no. And also, no one is talking about where Donald Trump left the unemployment rate in this country after COVID-19. The highest it's been since the Great Depression. And so the vice president has to remind the American people what it was like in COVID. She has to remind them what it was like when you have the president of the United States going before the podium telling people to inject Clorox into them. So she has to clearly state the difference on tomorrow, and I think she's going to do it, and I think she's going to prosecute the case while she's ready to lead and be the vice president, be the president of the United States for all people.
This is your voice, your future, Duvalier, Bluey, and Shin. We will all return after these messages.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Some interesting tidbits about the guidelines for this presidential debate tomorrow night. I don't think people understand how much Harris's team were preparing her for the mics to be unmuted. Their whole strategy was centered around that. And also, she made the argument that she wanted to sit instead of standing. Now, I'm going to have Joshua Shin, who has the insights on all the strategies they were trying to use to give them an advantage in tomorrow night's debate, and why it didn't work out, and they had to totally retool.
Yeah, so the Harris team actually, the story came out today that the Harris team prepared that they would, that the mics would be unmuted and that they would change the rules for them, but that turned out not to be the case. So now they have to go back around and fall back on her public speaking ability, which is not very strong, and if it was, their team would put her out a lot more. I think another underrated part of this is the visuals, right? One, Kamala Harris is not very tall, so standing on the stage next to Donald Trump is going to be a very, it's going to be interesting to say the least. Lastly, something you want to keep in mind is that the Harris campaign has tried very hard to keep her out of clips, news clips that of her making gaffes. That's why she gives the same speech at every single rally, right? But this is the first time that the Trump campaign will have a chance to catch her saying something. And if she does slip up, you'll see it everywhere on Wednesday.
Duvalier Malone, why is it she's a former prosecutor, she's a state attorney, why is it that there's this perception, and it's a little more than a perception, she has difficulty in speaking without these props? I mean, she asked for note paper, she asked for sheets that she could use during the debate, and they said no to that. Why is it that she struggles with this issue?
I don't think the vice president struggles at all with this issue. It's called staying on message. It's called being that she have just got into the race. She wants the people to understand what she's about. And so she's messaging that message around the country. So it's called staying on message. And I think when we look at Trump versus Harris in the debate, Donald Trump team wants one thing, but Trump wants another one. And so they're trying to control, him, because they know if the mics are off, he will say exactly what the American people need to hear so that we can see that contrast. The Vice President of the United States have traveled across the country. She has done a reproductive tour. She's been on an HBCU tour. And so to say that the Vice President of the United States is not willing to speak, that's just false. That's a false narrative. She has traveled internationally. She's spoken to world leaders, and she is very well equipped for Donald Trump on tomorrow. And I'm excited to see the debate. I'm excited to see that contrast between presidential and non-presidential. And I think we have to keep asking the question. The mainstream media talked about Joe Biden's decline. No one is talking about Trump's decline. No one is talking about how he is sitting in these press conferences rambling on, and no one is calling him out on that. Is he competent? Is he able to lead? Those are some of the things that we need to look for on tomorrow in the debate.
What about, and there have been discussions about his competence and the fact that he rambles and becomes unhinged, Rob?
Well, I mean, I dispute that characterization that you're both making on a couple of levels. Number one, as we've talked about earlier, as Josh mentioned, I mean, there are numerous examples that you can point to of Trump just excelling in settings like this. So, you have a situation, whether it's a media interview or a debate, and I think he's on his game. Is everybody perfect in every particular setting? No. And Donald Trump, for the past 8 years, I mean, Donald Trump has made, even prior to that, has made comments that people, have taken issue with.
But he does become unhinged, Robert. Come on now.
And
everybody knows.
Also, when we talk about it, he's excelling with telling lies, and so many lies where we can't even almost fact check him in real time. So we have to be clear when we're talking to the American people, he is on, we can't call saying telling lies is being on point. No, we can't call that, right? So we can't say that. I disagree with that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you point to Trump as the one.
Go ahead.
I think it's interesting you point to Trump as the liar when Tim Walz is the one who has been repeatedly, cited for falsehoods going back to his time as governor.
But could we say they both lie? Do you believe Trump lies?
What politicians?
I just want to ask. Do you believe Trump lies?
I don't know. I mean, is it really?
Well, Josh, it is relevant. Josh, do you think he lies?
He can stretch the truth at times, but I think that, again, his most recent media appearances show that he can adjust to different circumstances, right? Like, the only reason that people think that the muting the mic is going to be an advantage for him now is because they saw him in the first debate. Those rules were set up to set Biden up for success. And now that they see that, oh, it actually controls some of his impulsiveness, they want the reverse. But it's a little too late for that.
But I think your point is fair that they all lie and mislead people, but they think Trump takes it to a whole new level with the facts and mixing things together.
I'm sure
and I'm only talking about with the public, people who criticize him. This is not me. I'm just talking about what the public said.
Yeah, just to do 2 points. Kamala Harris last night finally put the policy agenda on her website. Now, this is, we've been waiting, over 50 days for this to happen.
Is that what you call it?
And well, number one, she's flip-flopped on what, at least 10 issues from where she's taken past positions.
So is a flip-flop a lie?
And but
is it that you're evolving?
But I'm going to tell you what the lie is.
Okay, tell us the lie.
The lie is the fact that she is associating Project 2025 with Trump. Yet again, even though Trump has made it clear, and the Heritage Foundation has made it clear, that those are two separate things. And so Kamala Harris continues to do this. I think that just demonstrates that she doesn't want to run on an agenda because she knows, as Dr. Carson...
She may think that raised money for her.
Oh, maybe. I'm sure it does with her base. But what I think we found, and Dr. Carson talked about this, the signaling to the left that she's going to take these opposite positions so she can be elected, and then she will immediately pivot on them. Joe Biden had the same exact strategy.
Well, wait a minute. That's what Bernie Sanders said on Meet the Press.
Yeah.
So I mean, let me come back to you, Josh. What impact do third-party independent candidates like RFK Jr. have on the 2024 election? And in your view, which policy issue will have the most significant impact on undecided voters this election cycle, and why?
I think, well, there's a lot tied up in COVID that I think the third-party candidates really spoke to, specifically RFK, right? So RFK was very appealing because he was anti-vax, and a tightrope that Trump has to walk right now is that Project Warp Speed was one of his administration's keystone, most successful policies. And now that RFK has supported Trump, he has to manage that balance of like, oh, you don't like the vaccines that my administration put together. Maybe he could frame it about choice. That's a big thing. But now that RFK is out of the race, Democrats have cynically tried to keep him on the ballot in a couple states. But now that he's out of the race, people are kind of lost. But it's Trump that's only the one that's doing the outreach to those folks, right? To the politically disadvantaged, the politically homeless, as they like to say, by going out and trying to talk to them. And I don't think that posting a platform, 2 months out from the election, is going to be enough for the Harris campaign to catch up.
Duvalier, how are young voters reacting to the candidates' platforms, particularly around economic issues like inflation and student debt?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that a lot of people are forgetting is that the Vice President Harris had been traveling across the country, engaging young voters even before she became the top of the ticket. The Vice President went on an HBCU tour where she talked to HBCU scholars and leaders in regards to issues around the climate change, issues around economic development, issues around small business, issues around reproductive rights, student loans, all those things that are concerning them. The climate change. She has been on tour and talking to young people. And I think being that she has already been engaged with that is helping her to formulate some of her policy decisions. And so I think young people are excited. Young people understand the drastic difference between Vice President Harris and Donald Trump, and they're going to make their choice in November. And I think a piece that we're missing with whether young people or older people alike in this election, Armstrong, people are voting what they're going through. So every single person in America have that one vote. And that one vote is about what they're going through right now in their situation. And many Americans across this country are seeing the rising inflation, and they are going to vote their interests. Many are seeing that when they go to get their medicines at the pharmacy, they see that this administration has helped to lower the cost of some of their prescription medicine, and they don't want to go backwards, they want to go forward, and they're going to vote their choice. Young people, millions of young people across the country saw that their student loans had been forgiven. They're going to vote based on them having that tangibleness of their student loans were forgiven. Many small businesses, when we look at the Vice President Harris, her economic policy plan for small businesses, they're going to vote their interest because many of them want to be entrepreneurs. When I talk to young people across the country, they're no longer interested in an 8 to 5. So I think her economic plan for entrepreneurs and startup businesses are going to really be appealing to those people. And so I am super excited to see exactly how the debate goes tomorrow. But I also think that we're forgetting that people are going to vote based on what they're going through in real time.
But it's not clear that Harris has separated her policies from the Biden administrations that these young people are living through. I think another effect of third-party candidates on young voters is that the New York Times poll showed that the majority of young people don't identify as Republicans or Democrats. They identify as independents. So it shakes up the race a little bit. And I want to push back on the small business point because my parents are small business owners. It comes down to you can't have small business without security. It's these Democrat-run cities where crime has gone out of control that most of these small businesses are shutting down. San Francisco is crazy right now. And there's open drug markets on the streets. It makes it difficult to get foot traffic when we can't get rid of the homeless on your storefront. There's this missing security element that I think that Trump can hammer her on more. And there are actually economic achievements of the Biden administration that Harris could probably tout if she wasn't so busy copying Trump's positions.
Finally, the New York Times said a lot today in its poll, but it also said there is a 99.7% chance that Trump will win the Electoral College.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen over and over again that Republicans have lost 7 of the last 8 national popular votes, but obviously they've been more successful with the Electoral College. I think it just goes to show in Hillary Clinton's case in 2016, she ignored certain states, just didn't even bother visiting them. That's why Trump was able to do that. But it's going to come down, in my opinion, to Pennsylvania, where the debate is being held tomorrow night, Armstrong. That is the state that Harris has to absolutely win. I think it's the reason that Donald Trump picked J.D. Vance, somebody who has popular appeal among those union workers, those blue-collar Americans who don't traditionally identify as Republicans. And I think it's probably going to come down to the economy, as we've been talking about so much over the course of the past hour. That's the #1 issue that's driving voters right now.
Malone, local ANC member here in our nation's capital, Joshua Shin, Young Voices, and Rob Bluey from the Daily Signal in your new role. And on behalf of us here at Your Voice, Your Future, WGLA 24/7, we want to thank you so much for joining us. And you can also visit me on www.armstrongwilliams.com and also on social media. The real Armstrong Williams, no fake here, baby. And also at arightside.com. Thank you so much for joining us tonight in such a provocative conversation. And thank you, Dr. Carson.